and I talk about being Gen X, guys in suits that are like really, pulled together, all of a sudden are like telling their favorite story about using a payphone, and it kind of sets some levels. So I often encourage folks to use time to get to know one another, make introductions, connect with the folks that you're working with. And this is also really important, especially when you're working with youth, and there's that, we're gonna talk a little bit about cross-mentoring, and learning about, so this is what was happening in my youth, right? What's happening in their youth? So, just a little bit about what we're gonna talk about today. And I'm gonna stand up here a bit. I talked about living with disabilities. One of them is physical disability that's bothering me a good amount today. So I'm gonna stand as long as I can, but I may end up needing to sit at some point. I think you guys will be a little bit understanding, and we're gonna probably have some conversation. So we're gonna start with some foundation and grounding ourselves and some shared language and understanding. Then we'll move to some lessons that are learned from HUD's Coordinated Entry Equity Initiative, which I was one of the project managers for. We'll talk about some youth-centered approaches that have seen a lot of success, and then really talk about youth-led success examples and some strategies and takeaways. Does that feel like what you were looking for when you walked in the room?
Yes.
Awesome. If it's not, if you feel like, damn, one of the other sessions really felt like it spoke more to me, please go. I want you to get everything you want out of today's summit. This is an awesome opportunity. I want everybody to be where they need to be. So it's so okay to be like, yeah, I want to go to one of the other sessions. Or if somebody talked earlier about like, can I be here and then dip out and go to the other one? I'm okay with it. I don't know about the other session leaders, but I am A-okay with people coming in and out. If you need to stand to be more comfortable, if you need to sit on the floor, if you need to move around, it is okay. If you are on your phone, you are often taking notes on your phone. I am not offended. However you can be in this room and be the most present, please do so. So, shared language. I have some group agreements up here. And you might be like, group agreements between the speaker and the people who are sitting in the audience? What is this? But I often think that group agreements are a really effective tool, and I learned this in the Equity Initiative, even when you're just setting intention, right? So it's not necessarily that we're going to be engaging with each other so much that these will come into play, but it is my intention to operate from this set of group agreements, right? And I think that is something that's really important. And group agreements, community agreements, right? There's a lot of terms you might have for this, group norms. Really important when you're working in any kind of group, because even if you think everybody is still aligned and on the same page, you will find out that folks are not. Right? We define things differently. And in the absence of agreement is confusion. So if we haven't actually agreed to this is what we're doing, if we haven't actually said this is how we're going to operate, I'm assuming that just like me, you think that, asking questions makes total sense, and that we approach things with inquiry and curiosity, and that you welcome that. Except maybe your norm is mind your business. And why do you have to ask me why I think that every time something comes out of my mouth? I don't actually like that. But if we have a group agreement around it, right? So we're saying that if I am confused, if I don't understand something, I'm gonna approach it with inquiry and curiosity. I'm gonna ask questions, and it's okay, right? This group agreement could also go on to say, and it's okay if you don't wanna explain yourself. Right, giving people an out so that their culture, their behavior, what's a norm to them makes the most sense, right? Things that earlier in today's talk, when Arash read the statement where they were talking about cultural norms, right? Not looking someone in the eye when you meet them is a sign of respect in some communities and a sign of disrespect in others. Right? A sign of dismissal in others. So if we walk in here and we're working in a group that's not homogenous, that we come from different cultures, and we really open it up and say, how are we going to communicate with each other? What really makes sense? What's your comfort level? Someone might say, I just want people to know I might not look you in the eyes when I first meet you, because that's actually a sign of respect from my community. That's how I show you respect, right? And if there's one person, and we'll get into this later, there's one person from that culture, they may never speak up and say anything. But if there's several people, they may feel more comfortable to actually talk about the values that are represented by them. So I have some here. I'm not gonna read them. But the slides will be available to you, and if you don't read, then you can use a screen reader or other technology to assist you. I also, if you would like me to read them, could do that. Is there anyone who would prefer if I did read them? Okay. Here's another set, right? I often talk about holding space for nuance and complexity, right? And that's that piece of like, there are always going to be different approaches, different realities, right? So people come to things from a very different way. I don't know if you guys ever went shopping before the 2000s and got something that said one size fits all on it. I just want y'all to know it never went. Right? My reality was like, that's not true from the time I was like 10. Like, one size does not fit all. They got rid of that, right? Like the fashion industry does not do that anymore. Right? They still do it? Girl, what factory is still making the label? I need to make a phone call. There's a piece of material is still not one size fits all, right? Like I cannot wrap that piece of material around me the same way that my sister Ness can wrap it around her. So these are some more, and then the last one, always, whenever I have group agreements, and what I will do when I'm working with a group is I might start with a suggested group agreement. We actually took time in this room to build group agreements. We would be done after this session. So I came with some suggested ones, but there's always going to be, the last one's always going to be what else, right? So even if you come with suggested group agreements, what else can we talk about that we need to be on the same page with? I had these sample group agreements. I said, what else? There was an amazing young lady who was in the room and was like, kids are welcome. Like she threw her hand up, kids are welcome, right? Because her baby was in a stroller right next to her. I was like, sister, yes, kids are welcome. And then there was another girl who was like, really, we can bring our kids? And then everybody started talking about kids and I was like, clearly, I missed the mark. Kids are welcome should have been on the flyer to go out, right? Like kids are welcome should have been. We can get some kids from the local church to come over here and babysit these babies and bring them games. And why didn't I prepare for this, right? Why didn't I prepare for the room that would be full of young adults who wanted to bring their children or who had to bring their children? So yeah, I love that. Her hand flew up so quick and I was like, oh, I'm about to get it. And then she said it and I was like, yes, that is exactly it. That's what I need. And then they came up with like 6 group agreements and they cut half of mine and they were like, that's not even how you're supposed to say that because that's not equitable. And I was like, yeah, okay. Let's get into it. And I loved it. But just the time it took to set the group agreements created a culture of acceptance among the folks that we were working with that really was important. So I threw them up here for you guys. So these are some common terms. I might read a couple of these. You probably know a lot of these terms or have heard them before, but oftentimes a term, right, is not universally defined, right? There's not one definition for how we use a term, especially multi-word terms. Like a homelessness response system. These were supposed to, I was supposed to design this differently. I fixed it and I never sent them the updated ones where the definitions didn't come in until after. So I'm ruining my own presentation. But if you were to define a homelessness response system, you might not define it in the way that it is here, right? Like if you define homelessness, there's an alarm going off in my purse. I'm gonna stop pretending like I don't know. Only I don't know where my phone is. Okay, it's 2 o'clock somewhere. It's 2 o'clock here. So overwhelmingly, right, you would not define it this way necessarily, right? Can you give me a common definition for homelessness response system? Anybody?
A system created to assist people experiencing homelessness.
There you go, right? That's the common definition, right? It's the network of providers that work within a system to respond to homelessness in a community. A lot of these definitions are from the youth and the YAP groups that I've worked with. So their definition was, overwhelmingly, homelessness response systems are designed to respond to single adults experiencing chronic homelessness and family homelessness for households with 4 or less members. Does this actually sound more like the systems that you're used to?
Yes.
Yeah. This is actually probably a much more accurate definition. And one, if we want to change, we actually have something to work from, right? A direction to move in. And so you'll see there's some of these that they really defined in powerful ways. Ism is one that I often use, and so one of my youth was like, you need to put ism up there because you always say it. And then inevitably in this presentation I won't do it, but I'm always talking about isms. So racism, ableism, ageism, sexism, genderism, etc. are biases in people in positions of power that inadvertently affect those who do not share the dominant identity. I had a definition that said, it said something about bigotry. And one of the young folks in the group said, bigotry is too hard a word for people to understand, because then they're like, well, I'm not a bigot, so then I'm not any of these other things. By putting bigot in there, you make it too hard for them to recognize themselves in it, because it's something they're really against. But if you look at it in this definition, right? If you're the dominant group and you're over 25, and most of the people in the room are over 25, and you're in a position of power, then you have to actually work against the norm of just going with what the over 25 community would say, do, act, use resources, right? But if you can really set yourself up to realize that we're all guilty of having bias, right? Bias is something we all have. We've used it our entire lives from the time we were tiny. It has often served to protect us. And so we actually embrace it more than we think. We just don't like the word.
Yeah.
But if you accept it, and then you can be like, I know I'm biased, and really focus on this one group. So I really need to be intentional about broadening how I work with this group and acknowledging my bias and actually asking for accountability partners to tell me when I'm leaning into my bias too much and it's getting in the way. So more, and again, I'm really not into reading slides. So one of the young people that I work with was like, you're not supposed to have all those words on a slide anyway. Slide presentations are supposed to be pictures, and you have too many words. And then I was like, see, I come from the world of working with HUD. So just a little background, I've been a HUD technical assistance provider for a little over 4 years. And prior to that, I worked in communities that received HUD funding, and almost all of my positions were paid for through HUD funding for like 20 years. So I come from that kind of HUD space of like, you've got to put all the words up there because somebody's going to want to download the slides and then your pictures will be useless. So I put a lot of words on my slides, but I try to do a little bit of what my youth told me is important. So anything up here that you guys disagree with that stands out is like, eh. Anything up here where you're like, hell yeah.
I think you're forcing us to read the slides right now.
It's so inappropriate, and then the print is not big enough to be like everybody.
Back here. Hey,
Yeah.
I have a question on the previous slide. I was just curious where you got the households of 4 or less.
So this is actually a group that was looking at data. So that definition actually came from a group that was looking at data in the community where we were looking at it. And so households with 4 members or less had exit rates that were more than 20% higher than the households that had 5 or more members.
For sure.
And so that's how they defined their system as it was then, because they wanted a grounding definition to move from that to where they were headed. No problem. Any other questions? And again, not your common definitions. These are often, most of these definitions came from communities that I worked with, where we would take common terms and then we would define them in terms of the community we were working in. Again, really effective when you're working with youth, right? Because the perspectives are often so different. Youth homelessness, I think I have up here, individuals and households led by individuals under 25 who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. So this is actually one of the HUD definitions. And I had youth tell me this is not how their community treats youth homelessness, right? Like, they really are focused on just the folks who are sleeping outside or just the folks who fall into a certain category. But most of it is really the lack of a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. I've got some place to be in the daytime because the mall is open, or whatever else it might be. And I sometimes have, hey, welcome, come on in. I sometimes have a place to be at night because somebody, showed me some grace or compassion, or my friends and I pulled together our coins and we got a little hotel room for a couple of days, whatever it might be, but it's the regular, fixed, adequate, right, nighttime residence that really, when you start to look at it from that perspective, as your definition of homelessness broadens for that group, you really start to recognize you have to engage partners. Yes?
I'm just impressed that broader definition is acknowledged.
Yeah.
Because as somebody who works in a school district and lives by that definition, it's not always taken seriously.
Because most homelessness response systems are designed to help adults who are chronically homeless, right? Or the household with 4 or more members, which is not likely to be a youth parenting household. And so it's really not designed for those folks. So. But you guys are working on that in a major way in Nevada. So these definitions may not even apply to your community anymore. Like, no, we've moved past that. We really do embrace this. We really have made that effort. Okay, so here's a statement. Thank you to my folks in Tucson. Youth experiencing homelessness, youth experiencing housing instability and homelessness. Experience our homeless response systems, shelters, resources, leadership, feeder systems, and overall community differently than older adults. And many of those entities were not designed to serve them. Right? Some of y'all are like, mic drop. Thank you. Some of y'all are like, yeah, this is definitely true. And then there's others of you who are like, no, our system is definitely designed to work with youth. We're the school system. Of course we're designed to work with youth. Are you designed to work with homeless youth, right? Has McKinney-Vento really gone far enough in supporting the systems? How many of you have schools in your district that share a McKinney-Vento liaison with other schools? Like, you don't have an embedded McKinney-Vento liaison in your school?
I'm a state coordinator, and I can definitely say no to the home.
Yeah.
But
I have a question. I don't know what that is.
Ah, okay, thank you.
I can tell you what it is.
Okay, wait, I want to let y'all find it, but I just want y'all to I want to tell y'all about my friend. Is Desi the right pronunciation? Desi. I came in here and myself and Ness, in our specialness, could not figure out how to get this thing to work. We were like, what did we do? I'm using the clicker. She's like, do you need this keyboard and this mouse? She did not say it like that. She was so kind. She just came in, she was like, do you need this keyboard and mouse? Is anybody sitting here? I was like, oh, you gotta use the mouse to select the presentation. Okay. So, Desi had a question. Can somebody define McKinney-Vento liaison as it relates to the school system?
Go ahead,
So,
liaison.
I happen to be one. What
Thank you for your
happens
service.
is every school district in the nation is mandated to have a McKinney-Vento program. That program is built to serve students within every school district experiencing homelessness. The liaison's job is to be that person in the school district that makes sure those services are given and that students experiencing homelessness, as they're identified, are connected to education and whatever else you can afford to do with your grant funds, you do it. So it's really more about, it's mostly and primarily about enrollment and identification, and then whatever else you can do beyond that.
And some of those beyond that things are
Can I add to that?
transportation.
Because Meg is so fabulous. She's one of my famous 18 that's a comment. Yes, that's my boo. And as the state coordinator, at the federal level, every state is required to have a state McKinney-Vento coordinator.
Yeah.
So then I have to oversee every district, including each liaison, to then make sure training and everything is going forward. The thing is that the McKinney-Vento grant is a 3-year competitive grant. So districts compete for this much money. So they make it like Hunger Games, so may the odds ever be in your favor. So some districts typically always get money, where a lot of them don't. But then regardless of whether or not you have funding, you must have a program in place. So that if there were 2 kids that were standing in front of you, one was homeless and one wasn't, you were to function to the point where you removed educational barriers to where you couldn't tell which one was homeless or not. That is the main function of it. So thank you, Meg. But she's like boots on the ground. I just want to borrow her boots.
So I love you explain it. First of all, it's competitive money.
Yes.
Right? So it's not formula. Formula would say this is how many kids there are, this is how many kids experience homelessness, this is how much money per capita based on your local area median income that you need in your community in order to respond. Nope, it's competitive dollars, meaning, among other things, there's an understanding at the federal level that the problem is greater than they're willing to invest in. And so they're not gonna use formula that says everybody gets enough money to take care of whoever's in need. They're actually gonna use competitive money for other, there are other factors there, right? So your emergency solution grant, which pays for your street outreach and your shelter and some of those other things, that is formula, whereas your NOFO, or Notice of Funding Opportunity, permanent supportive housing, is competitive.
That makes no sense.
Right? So shelter, formula, housing, not formula, right? So this is one of those, we come up with these statements when I work with youth in particular, where they feel really confident that this defines what their problem is, and then we can work towards solutions. So this is one of those statements that one of the YABs came up with. This was pre-YAB, so this is one of the youth groups, we used to call them youth groups, came up with that the YAB adopted. Okay, so lessons from the Coordinated Entry Equity Initiative. This is the theory of change for the Equity Initiative. So in 2020, HUD decided that they were going to invest in equity for the first time sort of ever. They made the decision probably in like 2016 because nothing happens fast at HUD. But they decided that they were actually going to put resources into communities to have more equitable responses, because in every single state in this nation, people of color experience homelessness at a more accelerated rate than the general population, and they have disparate outcomes. So not only do they experience homelessness more, but they actually have worse outcomes statistically. So HUD decided that they would invest in this initiative, and so they came with this theory of change to improve the housing outcomes and system experiences for Black, Brown, Indigenous, and all people of color engaging with homeless response systems. It was one of the first times that they've ever actually called out, right, a specific community, the Indigenous community, people of color. And so then they had these if statements and then statements. So if you use a racial equity lens to examine local data and context and identify racial inequities in a system, and if you bring Black, Brown, Indigenous, and all people of color and those with lived experience of homelessness into roles that facilitate the co-design of new systems and processes, and if you use racial equity tools and approaches to guide racial equity work, and if you deepen their knowledge and practice of racial equity practices in communities, and communities engage in improvement projects that test potential racially equitable strategies and processes, then you would learn how to interrogate the entire homeless system in a way that leads to dismantling systemic racism. Then you would understand what skills and design structures are necessary to work toward a racially equitable system. Then you would test and develop more racially equitable processes that respond to identified racial inequities in local conditions. And then the SWIFT coordinated entry system is the direction of, moves in the direction of racial equity, and so forth. I read most of that. The other two are basically the thens on the other two Fs. I read most of that because I could tell people in the back were like 3 of you back there were like, I can't see nothing. So I did read that. Right, but we want to see greater housing stability and fewer returns to homelessness for Black, Brown, Indigenous, and all people of color. And so what we used in the equity initiative, right, is that we're not wanting the improvement to happen for people of color and then have diminished value in the homelessness response system for white folks, right? That's not what we're looking for. We're not looking to say Black instead of white.
Right.
We're comparing the experiences of one group against the experience of the whole group, right? So this is the idea of targeted universalism. So I worked with a group of youth who talked about targeted universalism often never gets to them, right? They're like, people will talk about people of color, they'll talk about people with disabilities, they'll talk about that, but they don't really talk about youth within those categories, right? So even within those efforts, we're still invisible. And so really trying to get that understanding of what their experience is within these areas is as important as it is to just focus on the area, right? We could say that youth nationwide, right, we're experiencing things differently, and we'll look at some Nevada data in a moment, and that'll be more highlighted. So are folks familiar with targeted universalism? Big mouth, okay. So it's an approach that aims to achieve a universal goal, right? They want everybody to meet this goal, but they start with who's the furthest from achieving that goal, and they target that group to make things better. So one example, right? And so I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna read this one too, because I see people squinting. The policy approach that aims to achieve a universal goal, like ensuring everyone has access to housing, by implementing targeted interventions specifically designed to address the unique barriers faced by different groups experiencing homelessness, such as racial minorities, individuals with disabilities, families with children, LGBTQIA+ community, and youth, thereby creating a more equitable solution for homelessness for everyone in the population. So a common example of this that folks can really understand is the curb cut effect. So you guys have curb cuts here? They're required nationwide, but I've been to several communities, usually more rural, that they're very rare, right? Like it's not every curb. I noticed at the hotel I was in, like the whole front curb was just flat. And I was like, oh my God, why do we have to have it different? Right? Like, why don't we have these little things, these little gutters next to like the flat curb, and so the water would run off? But I guess it figures how much water and the things like that you actually have to deal with. So curb cut is the idea that the curb is lowered at intersections so that folks with wheelchairs can actually use them. So I don't know if you guys know the story of the curb cut and how it came to be, but there was a young man who contracted polio when he was 14 years old. He was paralyzed for most of his body below the neck. And he had to use an iron lung to breathe. And he was one of the first students with a severe disability to attend University of California, Berkeley. So his name was Roberts. So a lot of people know about Jack Fisher in Kalamazoo, who was a disabled veteran who sued and then got Kalamazoo, Michigan, of all places in the world, was the first to have laws that guaranteed curb cut. But a lot of people don't know about Roberts, who was a youth himself, and he and his friends, he was paralyzed pretty much from the neck down, so he did not physically do it himself. But his friends, when the school would not do curb cuts, right, they wouldn't provide a way, so he usually had to use people's driveways, or his friends would have to lift his wheelchair down off the curb, or he'd have to just miss out and not be able to do certain things. So he and his friends decided that at night, they would go tear up the curb. They would just destroy the curb themselves, lay some asphalt, and make a curb cut. And then guess what the city would do? They would actually invest the money to fix the curb.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So you're not gonna invest the money to do the curb cuts, but you're gonna invest the money to fix the curb, right? Because they were not seeing it as a person with a disability, the young people in our community saying that this is what we need, and going out and doing it themselves, they saw it as vandalism. But eventually they did it enough that somebody who was actually in the staff from UC Berkeley, the administrators from UC Berkeley, and a couple people who were working for the city actually said, okay, they're actually doing something we should be doing. Like, instead of putting the curbs back, let's just flow with it, do it, right? And a lot of the youth I work with talk about that's what allyship really looks like, right? So, and that's the bias that the community had, that this was vandalism because young people were tearing up the curb and putting down this asphalt, and it wasn't to code and all these other things. But really what they were doing was demanding what they needed and making it happen. Okay, so in the equity initiative, all the communities got 3 coaches. There was a data coach, someone on the team, I won't say a data coach because it wasn't locked into one person, but at least one person on the team had expertise in data, at least one person on the team had lived experience, so their expertise was born of having experienced homelessness themselves, and at least one person on the team was a system transformation or strategic plan. They call it the strategic planning expertise, but our youth changed it to system transformation specialists. So these were the 3 teams that you would have. You would have a team that had all 3 of these. And so HUD paid for coaches to go into groups of communities. We had 2 cohorts that would support a community and provide expertise for them to create a racial equity action plan. And then there was cross-team diversity, right? So you had a team that was assigned to your community of these 3 people, but then you had a lot of other diversity in the group of coaches that would all get together and work and support each other. So there was racial diversity, gender diversity, and geography diversity. This is another statement that came out of our work. Anytime we do something for someone that they can and want to do for themselves, we're engaging in a form of oppression. The result will never be fully aligned with their purpose, nor be fully trusted by them. This is especially true of youth experiencing housing instability. If we want youth to trust the system, we must create a pathway for youth-led system change. The young people I work with are brilliant, aren't they? Yeah, so we spent time coming up with these statements, right, that anchor us, that help us to go into, larger rooms with COC leads and all these other folks, and we put a statement like this up, and we just let it marinate. Like, we'll throw this up and just sit there for like 35 seconds. I don't know if y'all have ever just sat quietly in a large room full of people for 35 seconds with nobody talking, but it can get uncomfortable, right? And then we'll ask, who's ready to make this change? How many of the people in this room need to provide the allyship, the mentorship, the leadership, use your power to make this happen? Are there some of us in the room who need to get out of the way? Is there somebody here who just doesn't believe that this is what needs to happen? And we need to have another conversation. Because if we're really gonna make significant change when it comes to youth homelessness, we have got to make room for youth to lead that. Another statement that our young folks will often talk about is allyship is valuable, but it is no substitute for kinship. It's not just having the one person on your COC board, your organization board, having, the leader of the YAB coming to the ICH meetings. How many people are in the room matters that share that identity. We have a lot of our young people who will tell us that they are not comfortable speaking up in a room where they're the only youth. They're just not gonna engage in the conversation in the same way. They may talk to the one person who they're closest to, But even that, giving the information to someone else and having them deliver it on your behalf goes back to that other statement. Anytime we do something for someone that they can and want to do for themselves, we're engaging in oppression. So you have to make more than just room for one, more than room for two. You have to bring together your groups of young people from diverse backgrounds themselves, right? And actually give them the space and the power to do the work. It may take longer, but it will be better. So sphere of influence is another thing we talk about a lot in the Equity Initiative. Oh, no, don't do that. So what is your sphere of influence? And we talk about this especially, again, this is like that grounding and foundational work with our young people, because oftentimes our young folks, when they're coming into the work, don't feel necessarily that they have a sphere of influence. And so this is one of the sphere of influence examples from one of the young people that I worked with. So we always start with self in the first little circle down there, and then what's next. And so it was self, peers, community or continuum of care, the greater community beyond the continuum of care, and the local government, federal partners like HUD, Health and Human Services, the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, national policymakers like NAEH or National Alliance to End Homelessness. And then this one I thought was interesting, media, activism, and social norms. And this is really funny because I was actually on a Zoom call with some of them the other day. And one of the young folks said, the word demure has completely changed. I'm very demure, I'm very mindful. Right? And so they were talking about, like, they can get access to that larger circle sometimes faster than they can the ones beyond their peers. And so sometimes that creates a different kind of pressure. And so they were talking about using social media and how their social media presence would and could impact their ability to do work in these other areas, right? And so one of them was talking about, you know, they wanted to have a channel where they would talk about youth homelessness. But there was another youth in the community who they know has been very clearly shut out because they talk very often on social media about the failures of the system. And so we talked about it, right? We talked about what is the value of it? Like, is it worth it? If you feel like it would actually get you shut out, is it still worth it to do it? Because you have to follow what means the most to you. We talked about how you could do it effectively, right? If you're talking about failures of the system, also talk about solutions. Talked about highlighting youth over highlighting youth allies. So how they would go about doing it. And I believe it is their intention to move forward with it, and I think that's a great idea. But just really recognizing that, like, for my generation, that outer circle, when I think of that, I think of like brands, right? I think of things that are beyond me, because I really don't think about myself in that medium. He was like, sis, you need to like, he was like, you need to be doing a Monday moment. Every Monday you should be doing like 2 minutes. He's talking about marketing my business at this point, right? He's like, you just launched your business. You need to be on there every moment on LinkedIn. He's like, don't y'all have an old people thing called LinkedIn? They all have LinkedIn now. So, but it was like saying, like, put something out there. You have take one of your slides and just talk about one of us. Like, oh, I cannot do it. Just even getting dressed every day. Are you kidding me? I have been through a pandemic. I have Zoom meetings with a photograph that allows me to keep my messy bun. But yeah, so it was just a really interesting dynamic, because to me that circle is far out there. And they were saying, pull it closer. And I misgendered and said I want to apologize to that person. They use they, them pronouns. So, but it's just an interesting, we had them really talk about their sphere of influence. This really works in any kind of group dynamic as you start to understand where your power lies. So some youth-centered approaches. So everyone can get access to, and I'll have the link on one of these slides. Everyone can get access to HUD's racial equity tool. What that does is it takes your local data, including census data, your point in time count, which is an annual count of folks experiencing sheltered and every other year unsheltered homelessness in a community. Some communities do unsheltered homelessness every year, but at least minimally you're required to count the folks who are in shelter every year and the folks who are unsheltered every other year along with the sheltered folks. And it uses your PIT data, your annual homelessness assessment data, or your longitudinal
LAS, longitudinal system analysis.
system, yeah, I was like LSA. Somebody said LAS and threw me a little bit, but a longitudinal system analysis data, which is basically a count of how many people have been in your system every year and what their outcomes are. And so they use that data to then, and a poverty index, to come up with these statistics, right? And so when we look at, this is based on NV 500, which is this community. So when you look at this local Southern Nevada data, it's telling us that these are the experiences, right? So if you look at the total population, your population is 11% Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, 12% Black African American, 1% American Indian, Alaskan Native, and Indigenous, 53% white, and let me go to that slide.
Other?
No, it's the number I can't see on the thing. 20, is that 23%? Yeah, 23%, some kind of other or multiracial. And then when you look at the poverty numbers, you're gonna see some increases or decreases, right? So if you look at the Asian population, or Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, they make up 11% of the total population, less so in poverty, even less so experiencing homelessness, right?
Right.
And when you break that down, so let me just talk a little bit about who's in the room matters, right? Putting together Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander is like, it's like saying that, you know, Native Americans, right? Like we say that, and then how many tribes are there? When you break this down, you'll actually see like the 4% who are experiencing homelessness are probably like 1% of the total Asian population. So there is an increase that's actually happening because some communities are more prone to experiencing homelessness, and sometimes 4 times more than the general population, but they get lost in grouping them together. Exactly. So now let's look at these numbers when it relates to youth.
Wow.
I'm gonna go back. I want you to look, total population experiencing homelessness. And then youth in the total population versus youth experiencing homelessness. 79% of your youth experiencing homelessness identify as Black, African American, or African, as opposed to 13% of the youth in your general population in your community. So if you don't have a targeted effort to address homelessness among Black, African American, and Africans, then you may not actually be reaching the population that you think you want to work with. And again, you can see this for every community, so you can also look at like, I love this tool because I'll look at similar populated communities. We all know what like communities are similar to us across the country, and then we can look at their data and see if there's been improvement over time, if they're looking at different numbers, and then we can reach out to those communities and talk about like what strategies have you used that have been effective? What strategies are we using that are effective? What challenges are you seeing? So again, we look at them side by side, we can see that that's what I was talking about before when I said, if you're not really looking specifically at youth, you might be missing some really critical data. When you focus in on youth versus the general it was bad enough with the general population, right? 12% of your general population is African American, 59% are experiencing sheltered homelessness, 33% experiencing unsheltered homelessness. But when you look at youth, you can see that there's a really more significant disparity in who's experiencing homelessness. And this doesn't show outcomes, but what we've seen, and I can't attribute this specifically to Nevada 500 or Southern Nevada, but what we have seen across the country is that the outcomes are even worse than the disparities, which is why the disparities are going up. Yeah.
And I'm probably gonna get burned for this, but that's okay, because, I have a strong back. Now, this is where we get into those intent versus impact,
Yes,
because the data's always been in our faces, this is nothing new.
Nothing new.
the systems are designed to work as they do.
Okay, so thank you for saying the quiet part out loud. So I was gonna say, to me, based on all of this money, and I know that some people may agree to disagree, and that's fine, but we can build stadiums, implode buildings, and bring economical stuff here, but for some reason, we can't get this affordable housing shit right.
Right.
And so, as the state coordinator, this is where I always bring the fight to them and say, you can afford this, but you can't afford that. And then I always ask, where is the fervency? Because if you are ever faced with this situation, how quick do you want somebody else to jump? And give me the resources.
Listen,
You're welcome.
listen to me. The whole choir in the back, the whole usher board is back there testifying. I can't hear you. I can't hear you, brother.
Okay, so I'm a blueprinter. I like to build. So
Yes.
every time I come around, Vegas is more expensive and more, how do I put it? They can kill Dubai if they wanted to, type thing. Dubai is a very known and very big city, bigger than Vegas. But the thing about it is that for a city that is that big, how is it that Dubai is able to put money into their civilians, into their people? With all of this brand new stuff, you have Ferrari Museum and all of this stuff, and they're still doing what they're supposed to. But then you have a smaller city, a nice place, world mecca, may I just say, but you guys haven't created $1 billion building that is put for youth homelessness, or you shouldn't even be calling them homeless. Obviously, you should call them rehabilitated youth. If you call them homeless and then you tell them that they are homeless, they're gonna go out to the world and tell people that they're homeless. You know?
Yeah.
It just don't make sense. It's like, you sit here and I see the new building that they're putting downtown. What is that for? Oh, a bunch of people who have the money to buy it. It's not for people who are gonna be your future, the people who are gonna be your next doctors. You know, you got a whole bunch of young people who don't have money and can't go to college and can't go to school or don't want to because they're demoralized. Guess what? Now your entire future is failed. Healthcare is gonna fail. The economy is gonna keep falling.
Yep.
It's not gonna be.
Your borders
And
won't
then
stand.
what you're gonna do, building still. It makes no sense. This is a failure to the youth. And I've experienced it. I've watched friends die because of being homeless. And I've not eaten multiple nights because of it. I always see the spirit in endurance. At the same time that I was homeless. And that was what, $1.5 billion, and now they're in debt. How did you have the money to build it but you're in debt? But you could have put all of that money into people so where you wouldn't be in debt.
And then they blow up buildings
And then
just
you
to
blow
build
up
something
and
else.
So we just go give hugs to each other.
I know.
Go ahead. Thank you so much for speaking up on that.
Yes.
Thank you so much for speaking up on
I
that.
won't until they're done, until they fix it. Vegas is always gonna be messed up, 13 or 14%. And you guys have a majority of my race. I'm hurt, that's what I am. Mentally
Yep.
hurt. And I'm physically.
Absolutely.
Me too,
Absolutely. And you're powerful.
You are.
I don't know if you saw what happened in this room, right? But when you spoke up and when you used your voice and when you shared your experience, you added your expertise in a way that made this
Well,
right? More than just lines on a screen.
My team told me, which is right here, my team told me that I speak for multiple people.
You do.
I speak for a lot of my generation. When people actually hear what I do, I'm the president of the Youth Advisory Board. Hey, hold on, I can tell you something when you're gonna go tell some state officials or some people what we need. And I'm gonna tell you right now, a lot of the youth are hurt and they're angry at the older generation because these are the same people who will be like, oh yeah, well the generation, younger than us, they can do this or they're softer. Why do you think that they're softer? Technology has been able to mentally destroy people. And then you have a bunch of kids who get into arguments with their parents due to how technology is, and then they display that in real life, and then it affects them in real life. These kids have nothing. All they have probably is a Boys and Girls Club going into stores and stealing. I watched this. Just like I watched my friend die in front of me. So nobody's gonna ever sit here and be like, oh well, we get an elected guy to come in and do this. No, it takes a person willing to put down money or put down a real heart and be like, hey, I can't keep seeing this. I don't know about y'all and all y'all other little billionaires, but I know I have the money to do something about it. My team told me that, I don't know how much we're over right now when it comes to, you just told me and it kind of blew my mind out here. But it was in the millions, okay? And I understand, like, you gotta realize these people, what you gonna do, hold all those millions, billions of dollars invested into these other youth. What are the youth gonna do? There's so many $1 billion hotels. One hotel on the strip is worth $1 billion or extra. And it doesn't make no sense. But you have all these homeless centers. I'm listening to the meetings, and they're talking about bed capacity. Maybe if you guys build a way bigger building with a bunch of stuff on there called a universal canvas.
Yes.
If you had 3,000 rooms on there, you wouldn't have to tell nobody that they couldn't go nowhere. You wouldn't have to send somebody to the Salvation Army for one night to get their stuff robbed. And these are little kids. So it's like, and even the kids that are growing, even the kids that are my age, 21, 20, them kids, the male majority right now is murdering themselves. They're killing themselves. I'm surprised I'm still here. Because they're suicidal. It's a whole bunch of lies being told. Oh yeah, we got this, we're gonna do this for the youth. They go and they work a job just to go and become old and have to retire and die. So life ain't fun at all, especially while you're young. And it hurts. It's gonna keep hurting. Because the more that I see people under highways, and there ain't vans coming to pick them up and giving them water and clothes and soap and telling them, hey, we got you. You know, that should be a thing. That should be real. Instead of all of these crazy hotels that they build and then the world knows about it. Why the world don't know about what Vegas has been doing to you?
Because it's the intention.
Thank you. But all of this money, trillions of dollars, taxes that just keep going right back to the casino. Or to, and law enforcement helps out, but yeah, even law enforcement gets that money. Why isn't some of that money put into, why isn't it $1 billion being put into youth? That should be mandatory. It should be illegal for people to be able to invest into money like that and you knowing that there's people who are struggling.
And no education.
So what you just hit on, right,
Yeah.
is a policy priority that the YAB can focus on, which is if you're gonna build in Vegas, you're gonna have to put aside a certain amount of money to help fund the homeless services.
So he is the president.
Yeah, but he's the president of the YAB. No, that's what I said. Yeah, he's the president of the YAB, right? So setting up your policy priorities and your pitch and your so that you are ready to walk into any room and go through your 5 points and share your experience so that it's not just a PowerPoint like this, but it's also your experience being put out there and understanding there's a tax in that you have to be careful about. But I do want to note that you really just hit on a really important policy priority that's happening across this country, which is you have got to put your money back into the community. And not just back into general homelessness, but focus on youth homelessness. Yes, sir. Is it okay if I refer to you, sir?
Sean!
So, very proud of my president right here. But I think another thing to bring up, right? So, fun fact about me is I helped work on the legislation legislation to decriminalize traffic tickets.
Yes.
And then also to, we did 8371, which made it illegal to not prosecute, but not to, like, before in schools, if someone did something racist, they wouldn't get in trouble. So now it was mandated that they had to get in trouble for acts of racism in school. And so I think it's just great because like you said, like, we gotta go to Carson City, like, cause like, I always get asked, like, it's funny, I don't know what she's in here, but Erica Mosca, she just asked me to go up to Carson City with her for the legislative session. So I'm like, I would agree with me, but the thing is, we can't do it without you guys, right? So it's like, we can have youth like this with fire. The reason why I decided to be over the YAB, you know, cause I'm 23, and you're 23, right? Yeah, so the reason why I decided to become the advisor was because of all the broken promises I received when I was homeless, right?
Yep.
I was in this spot. I was on the street, I was doing wrong things, but I always say like, Kim, she right there. You know, people like Kim.
Here's my pageant wave.
Yeah, people like this Kim, people like this Z, she's in one of the rooms. You know, they talked to me, they told me that I could do it. You know, that's another thing too, like, the way you guys talk to youth are important, you know? Like, one conversation can change the trajectory of someone's life. Not just youth, but just people in general, right?
Absolutely.
And so, I just really need you guys to, as much as you support everyone, like, when you see like this, support us. Because it's like, we can have all this fire, but if nobody comes to support us, that's how we lose it, you know? And like, I don't know everybody's preferences, but to me, that was very sad this year, right? And so, it just shows that a lot of times, I was just saying, like, youth, we're not paying attention to. Because if you look at the marketing strategies of some of the elections, it wasn't really tailored to youth. It wasn't tailored to the population that wasn't voting. It was tailored to the population that was voting. And that was a problem. You know?
And I will offer you this piece of information that you may not realize, but the Trump campaign did tailor to youth.
Yeah, tailored.
The Trump campaign tailored to youth. You know, we saw like big, rallies and all those other things, but what we didn't see was the groundswell movement that was happening that was really focused on youth. And in great part, new voters is what won the election. Whether you approve of that or you don't, whether you think that was a good outcome or not, youth are the reason that we have the government that we have in place going into January. And so we cannot ignore the power of our youth. Thank you so much, Sean. I really appreciate it.
Yes.
So I'm gonna try to get through some of these slides pretty quickly because we got 12 minutes. So I showed you this theory of change before. Again, placed in the hands of our youth who said they were not visible enough in this. They created a youth theory of change. All right? So they really wanted to specifically talk about how communities could achieve this desired overall outcome if and then. So they were creating theories of change. And then they were asking for this theory of change to be displayed alongside the general theory of change for the equity initiative, right? Because yes, we want to make things better for everybody. We want to focus on Black, Brown, and Indigenous, but if you're in a community where the youth are the people of color who are experiencing homelessness disproportionate to everyone, you need a youth effort that is focused. So this was their theory of change that they came up with. I was planning to read it, but I'm gonna let you guys go ahead and take the slides, because we only got a couple minutes. So again, you saw this one before. We were race diverse, gender diverse, geography diverse. We were not age diverse. And so we brought in more youth coaches into the equity initiative to ensure that in all the ways that I was talking about, both at the community impact for individual communities, but when all of those coaches got together. The lived experience group, we had a lived experience skills exchange that was an affinity or exclusively folks with lived experience group. When we brought in the youth, we also had an affinity group for youth with lived experience within that group. And for youth, and they had like a quarterly meeting for all youth, because some of the youth that were involved had not had lived experience of homelessness. So these are a couple examples of youth-led success efforts. So Tucson Pima was in round 1 of the equity initiative. And this is their statement. We envision communities and systems throughout Tucson Pima County in which the causes of youth homelessness are disrupted and its solutions are permanent. This requires radical system change built on intersectional equity and youth power. In these systems, young people drive individual housing solutions and hold equal power at all levels of community decision making. They backed it up, half of their COC board.
Okay.
That part only half.
I mean, equal power. You know, any COC that's making half of their COC board youth lived experience, very uncommon to get one, right? So, and this study is available here at this link. And one of the amazing, she was a youth when we went to the community and we're working with them. She's now one of the leaders in their multidisciplinary street outreach team, or their MDOT team. And she's so outstanding. I just can't tell you. She was the voice in the back of the room who stood up and said, you know, and then she decided, I don't want to go the route of like going to legislator. I don't want to go that route. I want to go back out in the community. And so she's part of the multidisciplinary street outreach team and focuses on getting resources to youth who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness, because that's another area where the resource use is very disparate. People who are experiencing street homelessness and go into housing, the numbers are stark when it comes to youth. Like literally in communities, 98% are not youth, 2% youth. In a community where you might have a significant number of youth experiencing homelessness, they're not getting the resources. And that's because the majority of the resources they have are permanent supported housing that require you to be chronically homeless and have a disabling condition, which means you have got to have a diagnosis, which means, right, and we can pile on all of the issues with that. When a lot of youth are saying, no, what we need is a youth development center where young people who are not safe in their home environment can go. And they don't need permanent supported housing necessarily, because if they get the education they need and they get the resources and they get the mental health services and they get the substance use services, then they are likely to exit the system and become members of the community that can then pay back into it and support it through allyship when they're no longer youth. Go ahead, Kim.
Real quick, just something about our community. So about 20% of our youth here are already chronically homeless, and they have those disabilities. But what happens is they compete with adults for those housing. And so right now our community has 3 spots for youth permanent supportive housing.
That's crazy.
And they're competing with adults. And so that's part of our problem, is that they're competing with adults, and we don't have permanent supportive housing. Three beds out of, you know, and so our youth could benefit from those permanent supportive housing beds, and they don't get that opportunity.
And then I wanna add, you know, cause I'm Department of Education. Typically a school year is how many days, everybody? How many days is a school year? 180, thank you.
Depends on where you are, 200
So,
something.
I happen to be sitting in on a coordinated entry meeting, and you know, when I pop up, they're like, oh hell. But it is what it is, okay? Cause I'm gonna ask the hard questions. When they told me and they drilled down their dashboard and they said, oh, we were able to permanently house somebody in 110 days. And I said, so you need to tell me what I'm supposed to tell all of these families with homeless children and youth. So that means they're gonna spend a majority of their school year where? Cause you know, I'm an English teacher by trade, but that math wasn't mathing. So I was like, we need to go back to the drawing board and we need to facilitate a better way. Cause if you say coordinated entry, that thing needs to be coordinated, not just discussed.
Yeah.
Cause I can't do anything with 110 days.
This is what I'm working toward. Can we stop talking about coordinated entry?
Girl,
Can we
come
stop
on.
talking about how we
Okay.
get into the system?
Come through,
Can we
Stacey,
talk
come
about
on.
exit? Can we talk about people ending their homelessness
Okay.
and not how we're gonna just manage
So
it?
I'm not crazy?
I wanna allow you to talk, but I have 6 minutes to get
I
through the
got
rest of
you.
my
Go
slides.
ahead. Thank
So
you.
if I can have just a minute to get through this and then I'll have you talk. Is that okay? Okay. So another project that, again, the link is here. You guys can look this up and get the slides. Away Home Washington has a homelessness prevention and diversion fund. This intervention is the embodiment of the truth that young people know what they want and, more importantly, know what they need. The Homelessness Prevention and Diversion Fund allows service providers and clients to come together and create a housing solution that, as the data shows, will work. When we give young people the money to end their homelessness, guess what they do? End their homelessness. It's been proven time and time again. Make the resources available, and we do need permanent supportive housing for a lot of our young people, you're right. Because we are in a state and time where we're having a lot of young people who are experiencing mental health and substance use and developmental issues.
In our community, that issue, the developmental disability, is growing.
And we're seeing CDC is doing some work on this, as well as the FTA, there's some other agency, that the use of substances is having developmental impact on our young people who are not fully developed, right? And so they may not have been born or had a developmental disability in the first, second, third grade, but they are developing them through the fact that substances are doing such horrible things to their bodies, and so they're gonna need long-term supports. But for the most part, if you let young people come up with their solution and you fund it, they actually are more likely to end their homelessness. And they come up with, like, one of the kids for this was like, I need a car because I can live with my uncle over here, but all my resources and my school and everything else is over here, and I need to be able to get from A to B, and I need to be able to work. How many funds will afford to buy him a car? And buy him a car that's working and reliable. Not the $2,000, somebody in the neighborhood has a sign on their car, but an off the lot, $18,000 to $20,000 vehicle that they're gonna be able to use to actually, and what if it's a loan? What if we make creative loans at super low, 0% interest to the young people so they can pay for that car with the job that they can now get? And help to build credit. But that's what that young person was asking for. I just need a loan so I can get a car. I need a partner who will loan to me. Because my family's not signing off on anything. Even the uncle who will let me live above his garage is not gonna sign off for me to get a car. But without a car, my system, my program, my solution doesn't work. I don't need your transitional housing bed. Thank you. I appreciate the offer. That's not what I need. Right? I need to live in this community that I've been a part of where I can thrive. And I need to be able to get to this other community where I actually have resources and I can go to school and I can go to work. So these funds really are effective. A lot of times your federal funds won't pay for this. I actually had a meeting on Monday with Funders Together to End Homelessness. They have a specific youth effort where funders are funding these kinds of creative solutions that federal funds often won't pay for. So bringing in the money, get one of the casinos to create a fund that will allow youth people to create their own solutions.
There it is.
Right? These are the kinds of things that our young people are screaming for. Again, their successes are listed. So three-pronged approach, centering youth, changing the system. The systems were designed to function as they function. Unless we change them, unless we redesign them, unless we tear this shit down and rebuild something that works, we are not going to see the solutions we want. And then connecting with partners, the casino, the Funders Together to End Homelessness, the school system, the hospitals, all the partners that need to be a part of this, and making the safety nets tighter so that our youth are not falling through. If a child is not being embraced or safe in their home, our community needs to know what is the immediate response that keeps that child safe. Because then we manage our front door. Less people become youth experiencing homelessness because they become youth that are cared for by their community. If a young person says, I use drugs, and we don't immediately say, then you're not eligible for the program, but we actually go to things like harm reduction practices, where we really talk to them about how do you do that and why do you do that, right? So let me tell you something. Young people are not afraid to talk about mental health. Not in the way that a lot of older adults are. But they also do not buy into traditional therapy very often. You're welcome, thank you. So they often don't buy into traditional therapy mode. So you're gonna have to bring in partners that actually know how to work with young people when it comes to working on their mental health. All right, establish youth advisory boards if you don't already have them, embed youth voices in government structures, develop cross-sector partnerships focused on youth, create and sustain funding for youth-led initiatives. Let the youth design the initiative and fund it.
Yeah.
Even if it's a pilot and it's $20,000, use the data from the success of that to then turn around and get more bigger partners to come in and give more money. But we gotta start somewhere. Two things can be true at once. We wanna break barriers, so we wanna do things like use plain language, stay away from acronyms and jargon in meetings, make spaces accessible and welcoming, meet in places that are close to where youth frequent, build comfort in, like food and space and childcare, etc. Make engagement better for everyone. Everyone benefits from doing these things, right? But then also skill build, right? It's not enough to say like, okay, we're not gonna use jargons and acronyms in here. We also have to make sure we're empowering our youth to go to the next meeting where we aren't in charge of how it's structured. And so they need to be able to understand the jargon in that next meeting. So skill building and teaching them what they need so that they can take their message forward. One of the things, I'll just really go back really quick on skill building. Those statements that you saw, the youth theory of change, those are all coming out of working with young people to be able to take their strategy, their story, package it, keep it less than 15 minutes for when they're presenting, keep it less than 2 minutes from when they just encounter someone. Because people don't always have a lot of time, and we start to tell our story and we keep going, right? So teaching them to be able to do that marketing piece so that they can function when they go out of the spaces where we give them all the room they need to talk. All right, youth-led needs assessments and program evaluation. These are some of the tactical approaches that communities came up with in the Equity Initiative. So they have youth actually designing needs assessments. The questions were different. The questions were really different, right? One of the questions that was early on is, do you need access to needles? Do you need access to contraception, right? Like right away, they were like, no, ask that shit up front because for real, a lot of us need exactly that, right? Do you have some place where we could pay a little bit of money and you'd be able to stay? And then make sure your system can actually do that. And make sure that that's a safe option, right? They're not like at the trap house, right? If I got money, sure, I can stay at the trap house because I can keep people in drugs. So flexible and youth-friendly service models, peer navigators, getting youth to work with other youth. There's nobody who can reach youth better than you. Participatory program design and workshops. Get your leadership in groups with youth actually doing stuff. Get them to connect, not just in sitting in meetings around the table, but really getting them to connect in doing the work. Data collection, so this is like related to data, right? Data collection and youth involvement. So having youth collect data from other youth, you get much more accurate information than if I try to get it. Building skills through leadership training. We talk about cross-mentoring. So that's where a youth mentors a member of the COC, and that member of the COC also mentors the youth, and they learn from each other. The COC member gains greater expertise and understanding of the youth experience, and the youth gain that relationship with the COC leader. And we're 5 minutes over. And y'all have like 2 minutes to get to your next session. So. These are some things to keep in mind. When in doubt, ask you. Oh, you got 10 more minutes, okay. You're gonna make mistakes, admit it and move on. There is no bullshit in you. I wanna tell y'all right now, when you mess it up, say you messed it up and own it, and they will move on with you. Because there's also no one more forgiving. Like young people, like you're like, I screwed up, I did it wrong. And they'll be like, yeah, you did, sis. All right, let's go. We got work to do, right? The learning curve is real. Keep going. You're gonna screw it up. You're gonna make mistakes. You're gonna learn amazing things. Keep going. Thank you. My name is Stacey Matthews. It's my email. Feel free to email me. That is my actual cell phone. It's in my purse. Feel free to text me, or if you're youth, if you're an old person, call me. I think they're gonna have them. I just, you know what? Look, here I'm gonna own it. I always assume the slides are gonna be available to everyone who attends. So that's not the case. Here's my email. I will email you the slides. So shoot me an email. Do it right now on your phone. Stacey, send me the slides. Yeah, I don't want to put it on Melissa or Rosh or any of the amazing people. They never have it. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But yeah, send me an email and say send me the slides.
Stacey, I have a question for you.
I have a flight on these
Thank you.
I have a question about targeted universal. So here's what we struggle with, right? I do want to share. So I serve about 750 people a year, right? And so most of my population are Black males.